Welcome to IVF'This, episode 151, IVF and the Ministry of Presence. Hello, 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 my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well today. This episode is going to be a little bit different than usual. Today, I feel like I'm going to be talking more to the people in your life. Not that I don't believe that this is beneficial for everyone to hear, because I think it absolutely is. But I talk to so many of you about how the other people in your lives interact with you, how they engage with you, how they help you, support you, whatever. And I think largely a lot of the issues that people come up with, especially around the things that people say, oh, God help us all, but that is because people just don't know how to or understand what a ministry of presence can look like and the importance of witnessing another human and another human's experience. So I do have another episode kind of similar to this. It's called Supporting Someone Through IVF, that you can also refer your friends and family to. And another caveat before we get started, and I really want to make sure that this is understood and kind of said from the get-go. I am a Christian, okay? And you probably know that if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time. Many of you might not be. So while I might reference something from my experience through a Christian lens, my intention is to not limit the information or application of this concept through only that lens, right? The ministry of presence, which that phrase is very deep in spiritual roots, implications, but at its core is bearing witness to yours, or someone else's human experience. And I think that that is something that all of us can learn. And if you're anything like me, learn and relearn and relearn and relearn until you die. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. Now, growing up, and I've talked about this before, so if this is something you've heard before, just bear with me, because it is important to lay the groundwork for this. So growing up, I always knew I wanted to be of service to people, to situations, to people, and it's not as altruistic as it seems. I went through many iterations of what service would look like in my life and what it could look like being of service in the world, right? And there were times that I wanted to work for the FBI, I wanted to practice law, I even wanted to be a comedian. And I viewed and still view those things through the lens of service. Whether it was being an advocate or making people laugh, I think that any of those aspects can be viewed through the lens of being of service, right? Now, eventually, after more than a few college majors, we don't have to get into how many, I decided on social work, and I fell in love with that field. Now, my mom had always told me that I was a natural born social worker, because she is also a social worker. And so just based on that alone, I was steadfastly against it until I realized that I could finish my bachelor's degree relatively quickly by majoring in social work and minoring in sociology. And so here we are. When I graduated, my first official social work job was a hybrid position between the American Cancer Society and a cancer center that was associated with the university hospital, right? The university that I went to had a major hospital system. It's a wonderful institution. I still love it today. I don't live in that area anymore, but I still think very highly of the organization, that institution, all of that. Now, I took that responsibility at my very young age of 21 so incredibly seriously. My office was located just off the cancer center's patient resource lobby. So it was in the lobby, and then there was a patient resource center, and that was where my office was. And I stumbled upon a book in that patient resource library called The Art of a Healing Presence. I have read it and reread it no less than 10 times throughout the past 18 years. It is a relatively short book, and I think you can get it on Amazon for like $10, but it really did change my life. It changed how I viewed what being of service could look like. Being of service for many people looks like something you're actively doing. And this book really challenged that belief for me. It's a book that's very centered around hospice care. That was what it was originally written for, and that was a good portion of my job. So it made sense. So it might not appeal to everyone, right? You might be listening to this and you're like, wow, I like the information, but that book is not really for me. I don't have any interest in hospice or anything like that. And that's fine. But I think that it is an absolutely wonderful book. And I think this information and the way that it changed how I view supporting people, I think that that's a really important thing to share with you guys. So I'm going to give you some understanding around the idea of a ministry of presence and some suggestions on how to integrate it into your life and your relationships when you or someone you love is going through something challenging. Of course, within the context for us of infertility, miscarriage, loss, IVF, all of it. My favorite explanation of this concept, and I can't remember where it was that I heard it from, was that we will serve people even when it makes us uncomfortable. We will stand with people in the midst of anxiety and fear. Most importantly, in these difficult times, we will be realists. We will not pretend things are better or worse than they actually are. I really love that. I fancy myself a realist, right? I don't ask my husband this question, but I don't think that I necessarily jump to the worst possible conclusion, especially when I'm working with my clients and I have that part of my brain turned on. And I certainly don't want to belabor pain or stay in that kind of concentrated heaviness, right? I think there is a place for both things. Okay. I think there is a place for lightheartedness, even in the midst of heavy. And I think that there is a place for acknowledging heaviness, even when maybe you don't want to feel so heavy, right? I think that all of those things are a very delicate balance. I know that for many of us, grief, sadness, pain are so incredibly uncomfortable for us to experience, let alone to witness. But they're inevitable. Pain, loss, and grief are inevitable human experiences. And for you to exercise or practice a ministry of presence, that has to be okay. That has to be understood if these are things that you want to put into your daily practice or your practice of being present as a human, as a partner, as a spouse, as a friend, as a parent, as a sibling, as a whatever, right? It has to be okay that there are going to be times where pain and grief and loss will be present. You don't have to create silver linings. You don't have to provide platitudes. It has to be okay that these things exist in the world because they do. Because they do exist in the world. And if you're fighting against it, then you cannot truly be present for yourself or anyone else. Okay, so I want to give you some tangible steps, examples, whatever you want to call them, for getting into the space of practicing a ministry of presence. Okay, so I have a few, there are 4, so bear with me. The first one is listen. Just listen. Perhaps you've heard this popular advice before. There are 3 things you can do to help someone. First is to listen. The second is to listen. And the third is to listen some more. When you listen to others, you value them. You quietly and clearly communicate that you care. Real listening, the kind that occurs at a level well beyond polite professionalism, social norms, requires concentration, focus, and effort. When you listen in this way, the other person will feel affirmed and validated and perhaps even freed and empowered. Sitting in silence with someone can be deeply healing. You're not waiting for their next word. You are simply going deeply into that moment together, united by this quiet that you share. And as you open up to it, you can listen for what that rich, beautiful silence is actually saying to each of you and to both of you, right? Separately and together. One of my clinical supervisors used to say, silent and listen are spelled with the same letters. And I think about that a lot. The second aspect of listening is to believe the person. You don't have to agree with someone to believe their experience, right? That's not a requirement. You don't have to agree with someone's emotions to validate their emotions. It honestly doesn't matter if you don't believe them. It's their lived experience, not yours. Okay. So even if you are sitting with someone you care for very deeply and they're telling you that they hate their body or they hate this life, that is not then the time to remind them of all the wonderful things that they have going for them or anything like that. This is the time to see from their perspective and their experience why that would feel true for them. And in those sacred moments, it is not your job to be the seeker of some universal truth of their experience, nor is it your job to remind them of all the things they should be grateful for or could be grateful for or anything like that, things that they have to look forward to. It is your job to listen. It is not a complicated job. And I understand also that it is not an easy one. But your job is, first and foremost, to listen. Number 2, holding space. You can hold space for others mentally as you focus your thoughts on them throughout the day. You can hold them spiritually as you make them part of maybe a daily discipleship or prayer or affirmation or thought or whatever. And you can reach out to them in that aspect, like a soul to soul connection. You can hold space for them as they share, which means that you're holding space between them and their experience without any judgment. You may physically hold the other person by taking their hand or touching their arm or their shoulder, or perhaps even offering a hug or something like that. Your sensitivity and attention to what is happening in their body language is really crucial here, right? Some people aren't really ready or interested or willing to be touched. Ask them first, or extend your touch in a way that can be easily and comfortably withdrawn, right? If the need arises. Them not responding to your advance for physical touch is not about you. Internalizing it as a rejection defeats the entire purpose of being a healing presence, of that ministry of presence. So don't make it about you, but you can also hold space for yourself. You will not say the perfect or the quote unquote right thing. And thinking that you need to will only hold you back from being present in that moment with them. Okay. Your job is not to be their therapist or their coach. It is to be their support. It is to be their witness, to listen, to validate, and to love them. You don't need to have the perfect thing to say. By virtue of loving them and them loving you, your presence, just your presence, not the words that you say, just your presence will be helpful. So hold space for yourself. And remember, holding space means without judgment, because you will not show up perfectly, and no one expects you to. The third aspect of being a healing presence is to understand that the other person, the person that you're talking to, comforting, is equal to you in every way. In social work, we talk a lot about meeting people where they are, not where you want them to be, not where you think they should be, but where they are in a given moment, in that moment. We all have people that we love and we don't want to see them in pain. Or in the case of IVF, where it can feel like they are causing themselves pain, not that you actually believe that they're causing themselves pain, but we're volunteering to go through IVF, right? This is a voluntary thing, whether we feel like it or not, right? And so in addition to just going through the IVF process, we also spend a lot of time ruminating, not having children or not being pregnant, doing cycle after cycle without any breaks, isolating ourselves, etc., right? You could view those things, it's an option, view those things as causing harm to themselves or ourselves. That's not the point of being present. No matter what you believe about someone else's situation, if they are not directly asking for your opinion or input, regardless of how spot on you think your take is, it's not the time. The right advice at the wrong time is still the wrong advice. No two ways about it. This is also not easy, right? I am a very opinionated person, which I'm sure comes as a massive shock to anyone who's ever interacted or heard me speak, right? Now, when I am coaching or when I am talking to someone in a professional capacity, I have learned over many years to release my expectations, okay? That's my professional hat. Now, when I am just Emily and I'm talking with a friend, it's not the same. So in those moments, it is my presence that is being demanded or asked for, not necessarily my expertise. And I have to make a conscious effort to withhold my opinions or the, what I would do sort of examples, because I don't know more about what they are experiencing than they do. I do not have some kind of universal truth about their situation or what they should do or how they should be handling it. I want you to trust that the person that you are talking to knows what and where their limits lie. They know what's best for them. They know when it's time to move forward. They know when it's time to slow down or even stop. Let them tell you, listen, and believe them. And number 4, last certainly, but not least, you will do the most by doing the least. And this ties all the previous 3 points together. Sometimes trying to help doesn't help. Hell, sometimes helping isn't even a possibility, right? People will oftentimes vacillate between being like paralyzed by doing or saying the right thing and feeling so uncomfortable in a situation or about a certain topic that they'll throw out those like shallow platitudes, like everything happens for a reason or try to relax. We can become so preoccupied with ourselves that we forget that the person in front of us is just needing us, just needing our presence, not needing us to do something. They just need us. Almost always, people don't need or want you to quote unquote solve their problems. They just want a safe space to lay all the pieces on the ground to try to make sense of what's happening, right? To help make sense of what they're carrying and what they're experiencing. That's it. And this quote comes directly from The Art of the Healing Presence. You help when you walk with them, matching your pace to theirs. You help when you are walking in the direction that they're moving, even if it feels directionless, rather than leading them in a direction you want them to go or believe that they should go. You help when you walk close enough that they can hear you and be heard. You can be heard with ease, but not so closely that they feel crowded. Sometimes you look at them and sometimes you don't, but either way, they know beyond a doubt that they are being seen. I'm going to finish with this last thing that I think about a lot. I don't know if it was a quote I heard or if it was probably like an amalgamation of like my professors and my experience and my mentors and, Pinterest quotes I've heard or whatever. But the most courageous thing that we can do is listen. The bravest thing that we can do is stand with someone when they are experiencing pain. We don't have to be brilliant or articulate. It is true that the greatest ability as a friend is availability. Just show up, and then you can exercise the ministry of presence. And that is what I have for you today, my friends. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF'This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.